While there's the stereotype that horror movies are the most dramatically undemanding genre for actors, that's actually far from the truth. Sure, a garden variety slasher flick generally won't ask much of its cast of central meat puppets, but horror has also proven to be fertile ground for actors to deliver daring and totally unexpected performances. More than a carnival of blood and guts, the horror genre can serve as a canvas for filmmakers and actors to explore the darker aspects of the human condition, such as trauma, guilt, depression, and so on. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are incredible performances in recent horror movies. Vince Vaughn, Freaky. Though most of the performances on this list are in serious horror movies, Vince Vaughn proved in Freaky that comedy horror can also provide ideal conditions for a veritable acting clinic. And boy, is this one a sleeper hit. The body swap slasher flick casts Vaughn as a brutal serial killer known as the Blissfield Butcher, who uses a mystical dagger in order to switch bodies with a 17-year-old girl. The remainder of this film is basically the Vince Vaughn show, carrying it through its even more formulaic moments with his go-for-broke performance as a teenage girl inside a middle-aged man's body, a la Jack Black in Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. As much as Freaky might be a silly, frothy horror comedy, Vaughn gives a genuinely fully committed performance that needs to operate on two levels simultaneously in order to convince the audience. Given that Vaughn's comedic cred has been rather eroded in recent years due to the glut of stale studio comedies he's appeared in, this was a major breath of fresh air. You can tell he's having an absolute blast, and that feeling transpires through to the audience. Nev Algar, Censor. Centered around Enid, a woman working for the British Board of Film Classification during the height of the video nasties moral panic in the 1980s. But Enid's life begins to fracture when she witnesses a graphic scene from a film which appears to mirror a devastating incident from her youth, and goes about investigating the source of the footage. Censor is a fantastically creative horror film about both censorship and mental health, elevated substantially by Algar's outstanding performance as a woman desperate to get to the bottom of a past trauma that is still unresolved. Enid's slow descent as her journey pulls her increasingly away from reality is both fascinating and horrifying to observe. Algar's can't look away turn commanding the screen at every moment. Clancy Brown, The Mortuary Collection. The Mortuary Collection is one of the most shockingly consistent horror anthologies ever made, but arguably the most entertaining part of the compendium is actually the wraparound story. Here, Clancy Brown plays Montgomery Dark, a small-town mortician seeking an assistant, and who interviews a young woman Sam for the job while regaling her with stories of those who've died strange deaths in the sleepy town of Raven's End. Brown is, of course, best known for his distinctive deep voice, which has made him a regular fixture as imposing villains in genre films, but his part as the gloomy mortician in this brilliantly crafted horror anthology is on a whole other level. With the help of phenomenal makeup effects, Brown disappears entirely into the part of dark, giving a creepy yet ambiguous performance, the full truth of which is held close until the film's twisted final moments. It would have been easy for Brown to just sleepwalk his way through this with a typical generic sinister weirdo performance, but he dares to go deeper. Wunmi Mosaku and Sophie Dirisu. His House. Remy Weeks' stunning directorial debut His House stars Wunmi Mosaku and Sophie Dirisu as a South Sudanese refugee couple, struggling to adjust to their new life in a small English town as they come to suspect a malevolent presence lurking in their new home. The pair give equally brilliant and utterly inseparable performances as the couple Riel and Bol, each subtly traumatized by their brutal past and desperate to finally be free of it. Without their deep investment in these roles, it'd be easy for an audience to lose sight of the increasingly twisty story. But even in its most heightened out there moments, the emotional plausibility of their work is never in doubt. The pair received Best Actress and Actor nominations at the British Independent Film Awards, resulting in a win for Mosaku, who also went on to receive a Best Actress BAFTA nomination. Caitlin Shiel, She Dies Tomorrow. One of the strangest and most memorable horror films of recent times, She Dies Tomorrow, follows Amy, a woman who's convinced she's going to die tomorrow and spreads this fear like a contagion to those she comes into contact with. This quiet yet unsettling psychological horror couldn't have released at a much better time, capturing both the panic-stricken nature of any pandemic, but it's Caitlin Shiel's brilliantly understated performance as a damaged woman struggling to reckon with her possibly impending demise that takes the film to the next level. beautiful. Shiel captures the subtle confusion, anger, frustration, and sadness that comes with the knowledge of one's own upcoming death, using her face to say more than words ever could. James Badge Dale, The Empty Man. The Empty Man may have tanked with critics and audiences alike upon initial release, but once it hit VOD, the ambitious horror film from David Fincher protege David Pryor won itself a sturdy cult fanbase. As gorgeously shot and narratively surprising as it is, The Empty Man wouldn't really work without another remarkable performance from the criminally underappreciated James Badge Dale. Dale stars as James LaSombra, an ex-cop investigating a missing girl who ends up stumbling upon the terrifying titular urban legend. As much as the film is centered around its brooding atmosphere, Dale's performance as a man struggling to make sense of the increasingly strange occurrences around him is absolutely first-rate. While not nearly as showy as some of the more acclaimed horror movie performances of recent times, Dale's deeply internalized work lends LaSombra a believably weathered, worn-down temperament, the full extent of which is only confirmed in the film's shocking final moments. Madeleine Sims-Fewer, Violation. Madeleine Sims-Fewer, who also co-wrote and co-directed the film, plays protagonist Miriam, a troubled woman who meets up with her sister and brother-in-law at a cabin getaway. But a deeply traumatic encounter soon enough rocks Miriam to the core, and she sets about meting out bloody revenge in the hope of overcoming her pain. But it's not a spoiler to say that Sims-Fewer's deeply haunting anguish performance is not easily shaken. Brilliantly subverting the tropes of the rape revenge film, Violation forces the viewer to confront the grim realities of empty, violent revenge, embodied soulfully by Sims-Fewer's impeccably shell-shocked turn. Whether it works entirely for you or not, the lead actress's bug-eyed expression is sure to be burned into your brain for the foreseeable future. Lincoln Maazel, The Amusement Park. No other horror movie is anything like The Amusement Park, which was shot in 1975 by the late great George A. Romero, though considered lost until a print was discovered in 2017. Though Romero was originally commissioned to make the film as a PSA about elder abuse, it was eventually shelved after financiers saw the hypnotic, disturbing end result. Almost 50 years later, it's finally been released and has largely received rave reviews from genre fans, praising it as a uniquely unsettling horror and masterful posthumous swan song from Romero. Though technically rough around the edges, The Amusement Park sings on the strength of Lincoln Maazel, who stars as an elderly man spending the day at a hellish amusement park, where he's subjected to rampant prejudice and abuse because of his age. Incredibly, Maazel, who was already 70 years of age at the time of filming, only passed away back in 2009 at the age of 106, but it's a deep shame that he never lived to see how the film and his performance have come to be embraced. Maazel, who only ever acted 3 times on screen, including a part in Romero's Martin the very next year, gives a truly heartbreaking performance that earns Romero's experimental horror film its screaming soul. Rebecca Hall, The Night House. Hall plays Beth, a woman who recently lost her husband to suicide and spends the bulk of the movie unpacking that loss while making sense of the increasingly surreal, possibly supernatural, occurrences in her home. As a portrait of a devastated woman dealing with the multitude of feelings brought about by a loved one's suicide, anger, sadness, and regret, Hall commands the screen in every moment, capturing the most subtle emotions of grief in the process. Morfydd Clark, St. Maud. Rose Glass's stunning directorial debut, St. Maud, would be a deeply atmospheric, nerve-jangling horror film, no matter who played the lead role of lonely Roman Catholic nurse Maud. But Morfydd Clark's note-perfect performance elevates it from great to a genuine masterpiece. This is a carefully calibrated performance that keeps the audience guessing quite what's going to become of Clark's Maud until the film's jaw-dropping final scene, but one that bottles a very authentic sense of crushing loneliness. We're right there alongside Clark in basically every scene, and she has to carry much of the movie effectively by herself, which she does with tremendous skill. Clark's porcelain features and softly spoken demeanor belie Maud's deep well of inner torment, splayed across the screen so brilliantly as Glass progressively ratchets up the slow burn unease. For her efforts, Clark received a Best Actress nomination from the British Independent Film Awards.
Megan Fox, Till Death. Hollywood seems to have largely forgotten about Megan Fox. Once a blockbuster mainstay, her output has now begun to take the form of movies that mirror her own relative obscurity. Part murder mystery, part home invasion thriller, Till Death tells the story of a young woman handcuffed to her dead husband whilst two killers try to finish her off as part of a tense and brutal revenge plot. The film dropped on Netflix in summer of 2021, and even though it flew under the radar, it was received well critically. One of the film's main talking points was Fox herself, who was described as being an engaging presence and a joy to watch. This won't be surprising to anyone who's watched Jennifer's Body, a film that was poorly received at the time but has since gone on to become a cult feminist hit. Here, Fox also flexed her considerable horror movie muscles, so her excellent performance in Till Death is pretty much on brand. Kim Yoo-jung, The Eighth Night. A lavish Korean horror mood piece, The Eighth Night tells a tale of two halves, a monk and a detective both trying to stop an ancient demon from wreaking havoc with those it possesses. However, the plot revolves around possession as part of a larger ritual for the demon to return to full power, culminating in the taking of a virgin. Covering Buddhist themes such as fate, karma, and eternity, there's even a nifty 8-day countdown that adds tension to the proceedings. The film received mainly mixed reviews from critics who praised its atmosphere but disliked the largely derivative plot. But one element of the flick that was almost universally praised was the lead herself, played by a restrained but compelling Kim Yoo-jung. Here, Yoo-jung puts most of her performance into her eyes and facial expression, adding a layer of muscular silence to every scene that she's in. What could have been a cliched sacrificial lamb of a character is instead elevated to one of great sympathy and mystery, showing us that you don't always need words to convey complex emotions. Kiana Madeira, Fear Street Trilogy. Netflix's experimental horror trilogy, released back-to-back over 3 weeks, performed admirably well both critically and commercially for the platform. Based on Goosebumps author R.L. Stine's book series, the trilogy follows an unlucky group of teenagers attempting to break a witch's curse in the town of Shadyside over the course of 300 years, with plenty of brutal killings along the way. The absolute standout of the show, and one of the ensemble to appear in all 3 installments, was Kiana Madeira. Her central performance anchors all 3 flicks to a more cohesive overarching story. She spoke out about having to brush off the tropes of a comic relief character from her previous efforts in Trinkets to bring a more intense and focused character like Dina to life. Dina as a character is somebody willing to go to the ends of the earth for her loved ones, and the actress made this facet of her character utterly believable. Praise has also been rightly given to how Fear Street sensitively portrays the queer love story at the heart of the plot, which makes it pretty much essential viewing. Jasmine Savoy Brown, The Sound of Violence. An absolute bone-crunching debut from director Alex Neuer, this film is not for the squeamish. Arriving like a cross between the comparatively tame Sound of Metal and one of the more visceral Saw movies, this plot follows troubled genius Alexis, who, after recovering from deafness during the brutal murder of her family, gains synesthesia and embarks on a savage odyssey of torture, murder, and sound design. If that sounds like a strange mix, well, that's because it is. One particularly horrifying scene left us unable to look at an MPC drum machine in the same way ever again. In spite of this, Jasmine Savoy Brown somehow brings the whole blood-soaked horror show together. Arrogant but vulnerable, passionate but also sensitive, Alexis is probably one of the most sympathetic serial killers recently committed to celluloid. This is no mean feat given the blood-curdling nature of her escapades. I mean, seriously, who thinks to turn their best friend into a walking speaker? But Savoy Brown has us watching the villain's journey with equal amounts of disgust and awe. Kai's Setti, Blood Red Sky. Blood Red Sky was a criminally overlooked German horror/thriller that absolutely deserved more attention. A mother and her young son board a nighttime flight to go start a new life together, but the plane is then taken over by a brutally efficient set of hijackers looking for ransom. But the twist? The mother is a deadly and extremely protective vampire who must now choose between staying human for her son or unleashing the beast to save him and her fellow passengers. This underrated gem of a movie is chock full of great performances, but it's Kai Setti's character who is the standout. Playing the film's absolute moral center, he brings a dogged determination and endless sensitivity to what could have easily been an expendable sidekick to Nadia's vampire. He's also an excellent foil to the ruthless hijackers and the other more selfish passengers, always looking to help others before himself. His kind-heartedness is brought to life convincingly by Setti's nuanced and low-key portrayal, and it makes this film definitely worth a look. Pierce Brosnan, False Positive. A middling but ambitious genre throwback, false positive attempts to revive the long-dead genre of pregnancy horror first made famous by the likes of 1968's Rosemary's Baby. Here, a young couple, Lucy and Adrian, struggle to conceive children on their own, so turn to pioneering fertility physician Dr. John Hindle, played here by Pierce Brosnan. An uncomfortable and oftentimes overly callous journey of pregnancy, paranoia, and gaslighting ensues. Brosnan himself has had something of a low-key revival of late, playing villainous roles in films like The Foreigner and Urge. His pedigree for more unsavory performances has reached a pinnacle here though, because here he imbues Hindle with subtle threat, convincingly hidden behind a veneer of medical professionalism, to the point where we the audience even begin to doubt ourselves about his intentions. The quiet menace that he brings to this role stands head and shoulders above the rest of the movie. That being said, if you're a true genre hound, you should definitely give this flick a go. Word of warning though, maybe have a Pixar film queued up to cleanse the palate after watching the ending of this one. Yaya Abdul-Mateen II. Candyman. 2021 sequel to the original 1992 gothic horror classic saw Jordan Peele and director Nia DaCosta resurrect one of cinema's greatest supernatural slashers. Whilst some critics were left divided by this modern take on the classic villain, here seeing struggling artist Anthony becoming embroiled in the supernatural history of the character and the film's ghoulish namesake, longtime fans were awed at this new take on the story. Riffing on the established neo-gothic mythos of the original, the directorial team introduced more pronounced themes of marginalization, gentrification, art world snobbery, and police brutality, and although a bit shaky, it largely sticks the landing. And no one had bigger shoes to fill than Yaya Abdul-Mateen II. Stepping into a role made immortal by the legendary Tony Todd, Mateen rose to the occasion and then some, serving a delirious performance of a man at once obsessed with his subject and terrified at his own gruesome transformation. The actor brought class and intensity in equal measure for a true 1-2 punch of a performance that was completely worthy of Todd's original. He really does give a new meaning to the phrase tortured artist. Marina Mazepa, Malignant. Where to begin with Malignant? James Wan's bonkers masterpiece has left many a jaw lying on sticky cinema floors the world over, and for good reason. Following abused spouse Madison as she bears psychic witness to a string of horrific murders committed by her childhood imaginary friend, the film keeps its cards close to its chest for most of the film. Our brief encounters with the killer Gabriel for much of the runtime shows us a vaguely humanoid killer moving in some distinctly inhuman ways. That is, until the earth-shattering reveal that Gabriel is Madison's parasitic conjoined twin who has been taking over her body from the back of her head to commit said crimes. The scenes in which this is revealed sparks a bloody massacre in the middle of a police station. Gabriel/Madison's contortions are now in full disgusting view for the audience. Honestly, there hasn't been fight choreography this good since The Raid. No, really, it does stack up. But none of this would have been possible without Gabriel's body double actor, Marina Mazepa, who gives one of the most blisteringly physical performances ever put to film. Herself a dancer, who before this was only really known for her appearances on America's Got Talent, Mazepa brought to life a horror villain for the ages, making the insane concept of Gabriel as a physical presence terrifyingly believable.
Cassandra Naud as CW influencer. A social media themed horror film might sound like an immediately dated concept, but Influencer, which was released on Shudder, was anything but. Influencer sees Emily Tennant star as Madison, and Influencer, get it, is the title of the film. On a vacation to Thailand to try and drum up some interest around her personal brand. Instead, she meets CW, a woman determined to steal her supposedly perfect life for herself. The cunning and remorseless CW is brought to life by Cassandra Naud in her major film debut, and she absolutely smashes it. She's extremely convincing as a dangerous stalker, elevating the character beyond the usual tropes and conveying a threatening menace each time she's on the screen. Larry Fessenden as Clive Hochstadter, Brooklyn 45. A group of old friends and military buddies gather around their old commander's house for a seance, as you do, but plans to contact the superior officer's late partner go drastically wrong. I mean, of course they do. If they didn't, there would have been no movie. The man conducting the spiritual session is Lieutenant Colonel Clive Hochstadter, played by Larry Fessenden. Those in the know have been aware of Fessenden's talents for a while, but by putting him in such a prominent role, Gagan was able to showcase the character actor's skills to the fullest extent. He took on the challenging role of man failing to deal with grief, adding another layer to what could have otherwise been just another supernatural horror. Sophie Wilde as Mia, Talk to Me. Talk to Me is about a group of teens who discover the aforementioned appendage and its ability to contact spirits from the land of the dead. Unfortunately, it turns out that a mummified severed hand actually comes with a terrible curse. Who saw that one coming? One of the many things Talk to Me was praised for was introducing a larger audience to Sophie Wilde, a young star who had been rising for some time but finally broke through with her feature film debut. Wilde plays Mia, the lead character of the story, who was haunted by the death of her mother some years earlier. Mia serves as the vessel through which the audience experiences the film's terror, with Wilde doing an excellent job in guiding viewers along while conveying every single emotion of this multi-layered tale. Vulnerable enough to generate jeopardy but strong-willed enough to be cheered for, Mia is a classic horror protagonist through and through, and Wilde deserves all the applause she's received. Alyssa Sutherland as Ellie, Evil Dead Rise. When it was announced that the cult favourite Evil Dead franchise was making a comeback, some Evil Dead fans were rightly trepidatious, following the solid yet underwhelming 2013 remake. As it turned out, Evil Dead Rise was a rip-roaring return to form for the series, despite having very little to do with the original movie. This time, the story revolved around Beth, as well as her sister Ellie and her 3 children, who have to fight off a deadite uprising in their apartment block. While Lily Sullivan does a great job as the embattled Beth, Alyssa Sutherland steals the show as the demented entity that has taken over the body of her sister. Not only is she working with some deeply disturbing makeup and a stellar script, but Sutherland's physicality in the role brings it to life, which is highly ironic given the circumstances. Of course, without the human version of Ellie, audiences would have nothing to sympathise with when she turns. Luckily, Sutherland is able to create a likeable, 3-dimensional character in the short time she has, which makes what comes next even more horrible. Marin Ireland and Judy Reyes as Dr. Rose Casper and Celie Morales. Birth, rebirth. Since the story of Laura Moss's birth-rebirth revolves so heavily around the dual lead characters of Rose and Celie, it felt only fair to include both of their actors on this list. Rose, played by Marin Ireland, is a doctor obsessed with reanimating corpses, while Celie, Judy Reyes, is a maternity nurse who works tirelessly to give women the best birth possible. When Celie's daughter dies, Rose brings her back to life, but at a terrible cost that her mother must pay. Word of warning to everyone out there, don't try this at home. Birth, Rebirth is a new spin on the Frankenstein narrative with a fantastic feminine twist, carried effortlessly by Ireland and Reyes. Ireland keeps the character of the death-obsessed doctor rooted in reality, while Reyes plays up that oh-so-familiar character of a mother desperate to do anything for her child. Together, they make the perfect team. Amy Donald as Megan. One of the surprising horror hits of 2023 came right at the start of the year, when the world was introduced to the diabolical dolly, Megan. After her parents are killed in a car crash, young Katie gets given a gift by her scientist aunt, a lifelike robot designed to comfort the grieving child. Although things start off quite peachy, it soon becomes clear that Megan will go to any lengths to protect her new friend. Rather than build a real murderous childbot, the team behind this film cast an actual actor to bring Megan to life in Amy Donald, a child actor and dancer from New Zealand, whose physicality brought a creepy realism to the character. Natalia Solian as Valeria, Huesera, the Bone Woman. Pregnancy has often made for a compelling plot device in horrors. The high stakes, the vulnerability involved, the fact that babies themselves are a bit creepy. It all adds up. One recent addition to this fine tradition is Huesera the Bone Woman, a joint Mexican-Peruvian venture made by first-time feature director Michelle Garza-Severa. A woman named Valeria is delighted to discover that she is carrying her first child, but that joy quickly dissipates when she is cursed by a malicious spirit. To save her baby, her family, and herself, she must turn to dark magic, which may actually be worse for her than the curse. The job of portraying a pregnant woman close to the edge fell to Mexican star Natalia Solian. Solian does an incredible job of condensing an emotionally complex situation down into a digestible performance, drawing many comparisons to Mia Farrow's turn in Rosemary's Baby, which isn't bad going at all. Joaquin Phoenix as Bo Wasserman, Bo is Afraid. The mind behind Hereditary and Midsommar returned in 2023 with this sprawling, mind-bending horror comedy starring Joaquin Phoenix as a man one step away from a nervous breakdown who must take a seemingly simple trip to attend his mother's funeral. Spoiler alert, it's not simple. Not simple at all. In a film where some truly bizarre and frightening things go on, none of it would mean anything were it not for Phoenix's masterfully grounded performance. He sells Bo's anxiety perfectly, never once straying into the realm of pantomime that he could so easily inhabit in such an over-the-top environment. He's just the right balance of a real in an otherwise surreal picture, and it really helps tie everything together. Also, he's in pretty much every scene of this 3-hour epic, which must have been exhausting. Caitlin Dever as Bryn. No One Will Save You. Joaquin Phoenix was in pretty much every scene of Bo is Afraid, but at least he was able to speak. Caitlin Dever had no such safety net in Brian Duffield's No One Will Save You. Diva stars as Bryn, a young woman living on the fringes of a nearby town with little to no connection to anyone living there. The positives of this arrangement are that she saves loads on Christmas presents, but the negatives make themselves very clear when aliens land and Bryn is the only one who can stop them. As well as its high concept premise, No One Will Save You also stands out for having just 5 words of dialogue. This means that a majority of the storytelling is done via physical acting, and the majority of that is done by Diva, the common thread in most of these scenes. Not an easy task then, but one that the book-smart star relishes and thrives on, captivating in a way that a spoken performance could only dream of. This is an astonishing feat of performance from someone still so fresh in their career. Mia Goth as Gabby Bauer, Infinity Pool. In 2022, Mia Goth truly broke through with her roles in X and its sequel, or prequel, Pearl, exhibiting her vast talent with a varied and deep performance. Goth followed this beloved turn by appearing in Brandon Cronenberg's sci-fi horror Infinity Pool. Goth plays Gabby Bauer, a fan of Alexander Skarsgård's novelist character. At first, it seems like Gabby is your standard stalker, intruding on her target's married life, but as the dark secrets of the island getaway they are inhabiting reveal themselves, she too takes a more terrifying turn. Anyone who has seen Goth before will know how magnetic she is, but her turn in Infinity Pool is on a whole other level. She can flip between normal and deranged at the snap of her fingers, constantly keeping viewers on their toes as to what she's going to do next and just how far she'll go to achieve her goals. An outstanding performance from a rising horror force, Infinity Pool is worth watching for Goth alone.
Halle Berry, Never Let Go. From genre mastermind Alexander Aja, psychological horror Never Let Go centers on a mother and her 2 sons living alone in a secluded woodland cabin. Believing that there's an invisible evil presence lurking outside, they must stay connected to their house with ropes to protect themselves from being infected by the presence. However, when one of the boys' ropes breaks, the children begin to question what their mother has been telling them, and when the family's situation begins to worsen and the mother's behavior grows more erratic, the boys find themselves in an increasingly dangerous situation. A large part of Never Let Go's tension comes in not knowing how much of what the youngsters are told is true, with audiences being kept guessing throughout. Of course, at the heart of it all is Halle Berry's powerhouse performance as the children's mother. Known only as Mama, the Oscar-winning actor is a force to be reckoned with, perfectly striking the balance between a maternal figure caring for her children and someone struggling with mental illness. Although Never Let Go doesn't quite stick the landing, Berry is reason enough to watch this taut thriller. Aisling Franciosi stop motion. After impressing audiences and critics on the festival circuit in 2023, stop motion got its theatrical release in February 2024, before eventually landing on Shudder in May. The first feature-length film from stop-motion animator Robert Morgan, this gleefully grotesque blend of animation and body horror follows animator Ella as she descends into obsessive madness after setting out to create her own stop-motion film. Plagued with uncertainty about her choice as an artist and working under the shadow of her more successful and ruthlessly critical mother, Ella's work becomes increasingly disturbing as events go on. Moreover, the nightmarish monster from her film begins tormenting her in real life, leading to some of this film's most harrowing moments. Although it's the animation and gnarly gore that are the stars of the show here, Aisling Franciosi's appearance as Ella shouldn't be ignored. Rather than going overboard with her portrayal of a tortured artist, Franciosi instead gives a more restrained performance that conveys the tragedy of her character's plight. Carolyn Bracken, Oddity. Written and directed by Damien McCarthy, the filmmaker behind Caveat, Oddity is a recent hidden gem from Ireland that's as effectively disquieting as it is strange. 1 year after the brutal murder of her twin sister, the film follows Darcy as she arrives at the scene of her sibling's death to figure out the truth behind what really happened. Using her psychic abilities and a creepy wooden mannequin, the secrets Darcy uncovers are far more insidious than the supernatural happenings going on in the remote home. From the dark interior of its setting, its slow burn approach to storytelling, and the menacing presence of the mannequin sitting at the kitchen table, Oddity's uneasy atmosphere is a large part of what makes it work so well. However, it's Carolyn Bracken's phenomenal performance as as both Darcy and her murdered sister Danny, which proves to be the strongest part of this feature. As fantastic as she is in each role though, it's Bracken's turn as Darcy that makes this horror as creepy as it is. By walking the line between eccentric and sinister, viewers are kept on edge, never knowing how much they can trust Darcy. James McAvoy, Speak No Evil. The remake of the 2022 Danish thriller of the same name, Speak No Evil sees the Dalton family meet and befriend a British couple and their son while on holiday in Italy. After returning home, the Daltons are invited to stay at the other couple's remote farmhouse. While initially seen as a strange request from people they barely know, the Daltons decide to accept, believing that the visit could be good for them. Tensions quickly grow between the families when the hosts start to display strange and inappropriate behavior, which only becomes more aggressive as the stay goes on. Although the Daltons initially try to tolerate the couple's unsavory actions to be polite, they soon find themselves fighting for their lives upon discovering the real reason their hosts invited them to their home. Like the original film, most of the horror is rooted within the taut social anxieties, as the Daltons avoid offending the homeowners. However, it's James McAvoy's ferocious stint as Paddy that reinforces the terror, with the actor relishing every scene in a frighteningly physical performance that makes him a constantly intimidating presence. Having already proved his horror chops in the likes of Split, Speak No Evil is McAvoy at his absolute best. Nell Tiger Free, The First Omen. A prequel to Richard Donner's 1976 horror classic, The First Omen captures the unsettling tone of the original. Set in 1971, the plot follows novitiate nun Margaret as she arrives at an orphanage in Italy. After witnessing some disturbing events, she's approached by a concerned priest who warns her that the church is plotting to birth the Antichrist. Complete with a collection of spine-chilling scares, moments of gruesome body horror, and a cinematic presentation that looks like it was taken right out of the 1970s, The First Omen is a devilish delight for genre fans. And while Ralph Ineson's appearance as Father Brennan is another notable highlight of this prequel, it's Nell Tiger Free who steals the show as Margaret. Especially when things get more disturbing towards the final act. Free brings an intensity to her role that makes these moments that much more effective. Even when the horror begins to get a little outlandish, it's the actors' solid acting skills that keep things grounded. Nobody expected this prequel to be as good as it was, and it was Nell Tiger Free's performance that was part of what makes it so good. Mia Goth, Maxine. After astounding audiences and critics with her scene-stealing role in X and Pearl, Mia Goth continued to show her star quality in Maxine, the third entry in Ty West's horror trilogy. This film takes place 6 years after the grisly climax of X, as adult film star Maxine Minx gets her first role in a mainstream. However, when the actions of a serial killer threaten to destroy her dreams of stardom, Maxine will stop at nothing to get the life that she believes she deserves. Swapping the 70s-inspired exploitation style of X with the neon-soaked video nasty aesthetics of the 1980s, Maxine is a loving homage to the decade, which spawned some of the greatest horror classics of all time. And Goth is just as mesmerizing here as she was in those previous films. Her ability to seamlessly transition into a psychotic killer is part of what makes these films so engrossing to watch, and why her characters have become modern horror icons. Although Maxine is considered to be the weaker entry in the trilogy by critics, Goth's presence alone is more than enough to make seeking out this throwback to 80s horror worth the effort. Sydney Sweeney, Immaculate. With roles in The White Lotus, Euphoria, and Madam Web, Sydney Sweeney has become one of the most sought-after stars on both the big and small screen. However, it's her starring performance in Immaculate that really shows what she's capable of. The film follows devout novice nun Cecilia as she arrives at a remote convent in the Italian countryside. Not long after her arrival, Cecilia discovers she's pregnant. Without any explanation of how this could have happened, the convent believes it to be a divine miracle. But when Cecilia starts to witness strange happenings, it becomes clear there's something far more insidious at play. By exploring timely themes of bodily autonomy, Immaculate succeeds in putting a refreshing new spin on familiar genre tropes. Alongside its gripping central mystery, which gradually winds the tension until a bombastic finale, it's Sweeney's acting that makes the flick work so well. Carrying most of the scenes on her own shoulders, Sweeney's expressiveness makes it easy for audiences to sympathize with her nightmarish ordeal. David Das Mauchen, Late Night with the Devil. Written and directed by Cameron and Colin Cairns, Late Night with the Devil received critical acclaim when it premiered at South by Southwest before arriving on Shudder. A smart play on the found footage genre, this Aussie flick is presented as being the master tapes of a Halloween special from a fictitious late-night talk show. With the show on the verge of cancellation, smooth-talking host Jack Delroy does everything in his power to keep it on the air. This includes interviewing a young girl supposedly possessed by a demon, with events taking a sinister turn from there. Complete with a retro 70s feel, this indie gem embraces its period setting, mixing in some humour and creatively grotesque imagery along the way. Another part of what makes this film so engrossingly entertaining is David Dastmalchian's performance as host Jack Delroy. Whenever Delroy is in front of the TV cameras, Dastmalchian exudes charm and charisma, making him instantly likeable. Off-camera, though, there's a more sympathetic side to the character connected to his tragic past. Dastmalchian executes both sides of Delroy flawlessly, with the result being a protagonist who's hiding some dark secrets underneath their showbiz smile. Nicolas Cage, Longlegs. Although Nicolas Cage has played many dramatic roles, the actor is also known for giving some of the most brilliantly over-the-top performances, especially within the horror genre. And one of Cage's latest is profoundly creepy serial killer Longlegs in Osgood Perkins' film of the same name. The plot follows fresh-faced FBI agent Lee Harker, investigating a series of grisly and mysterious murders. She believes the killer is the same strange man who visited her when she was a child, with events only becoming more sinister as she uncovers the truth about what's going on. Cage is a tour de force of terror here. Even before audiences get a glimpse of his face, his peculiar way of speaking and mannerisms cement him as an unsettling presence. As with his other memorable roles, Cage likewise doesn't hold anything back whenever he's on screen, fully embracing the killer's twisted personality and relishing every moment. Only Nick Cage could make a rendition of Happy Birthday genuinely scary, with the result making the character one of the most unsettling horror villains of recent years. Demi Moore, The Substance. The second feature film from French filmmaker Coralie Fagia following the stylishly brutal Revenge, The Substance is a visceral body horror that examines themes of beauty and aging in Hollywood. Upon turning 50, movie sensation turned TV fitness instructor Elizabeth Sparkle is unceremoniously fired by a brutish TV exec. However, Elizabeth believes her problems are solved when she's selected to receive a mysterious serum, known only as The Substance, that promises to create a younger and better version of herself, which it does quite literally in one of the most gut-wrenching sequences put to screen. When Elizabeth starts to disobey the strict rules of using the drug, though, things take a squeamishly sickening turn. While Margaret Qualley and Dennis Quaid are both sensational as Elizabeth's double, Sue, and the sleazy TV executive respectively, it's Demi Moore who deserves a place on this list. Laying everything bare in a powerhouse performance, Moore is utterly fearless throughout as viewers feel every ounce of excruciating pain that Elizabeth endures alongside the crippling social pressures that spur her to misuse the titular serum. The Substance is a deeply harrowing cinematic experience, and Moore's stellar acting is a huge part of this film's success. Melissa Barrera, Your Monster. Your Monster proved beyond any doubt that Melissa Barrera is so much better suited to dorky horror comedy roles than more straight-up horror flicks like Scream and Abigail. Barrera gives an extremely charming performance as Laura Franco, a troubled young woman who attempts to piece her life back together with the help of a monster she discovers living in her house. The actress's work here is so expertly calibrated to the film's quirky, darkly comedic tone, transforming from a meek young woman into a confident, righteously angry badass, capped off by one of the most intense freak-out scenes. Her adorable chemistry opposite co-star Tommy Dewey seals the deal. And while not all of the film's twists and turns will work for everyone, it's without question career best work from Barrera, demonstrating the full range of her acting chops. Sadly, Your Monster was largely ignored on theatrical release, though it'll hopefully endure as a cult classic now it's available on streaming. Lauren Lavera and David Howard Thornton, Terrifier 3. Terrifier 3 is a film that's just jam-packed full of surprises. Not content to be the highest-grossing unrated film of all time, the slasher threequel also boasts not merely one excellent performance, but two. First up, we have David Howard Thornton, who once again reprises the role of iconic antagonist Art the Clown, bringing a level of physicality and expressiveness to the part that's easy to underestimate. Given that Art is an entirely mute character, Thornton needs to do a lot of the storytelling with his eyes, facial facial expressions and body language, and he absolutely knocks it out of the park. But David Howard Thornton is perfectly matched by Lauren Lavera, who also returns as the previous film's heroine, Sienna Shaw. As fundamentally ridiculous as this movie might be, Lavera's performance as a young woman traumatized by Art's rampage grounds the film emotionally, no matter how absurd its grisly death scenes might be. Lavera commits to the part like she's gunning for an Oscar, and the end product is all the better for it. Hugh Grant, Heretic. Hugh Grant has been enjoying one hell of a career renaissance in recent years, and so it was merely a natural next step that he'd eventually turn his talents towards the horror genre. And what a perfect vehicle Heretic was for him, casting the former rom-com star as Mr. Reed, a reclusive man who ensnares two young Mormon women in a disturbing cat-and-mouse game. Filmmakers Scott Beck and Brian Woods do a masterful job of taking Grant's charming persona and weaponizing it in a totally unique way. His initially disarming demeanor luring his victims into a false sense of security before the other shoe drops. It's obvious that Grant is having an absolute blast throughout Heretic, chewing through Reed's verbose dialogue with scarcely veiled glee, and in turn delivering one of his finest performances to date, one which even unexpectedly nabbed him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor, Willa Fitzgerald, Strange Darling. It's tough to talk about delicious horror thriller Strange Darling without giving away its most impactful surprises, but it's no spoiler to say that most unforgettable performances as its imperiled lead character. Fitzgerald, who was a standout in Mike Flanagan's miniseries The Fall of the House of Usher, is fantastic as an unnamed woman who finds herself pursued by a violent man credited only as the Demon. There's so much more to the story than this, as is gradually unfurled throughout the runtime, and without Fitzgerald's assured, intense performance, some of its more ambitious turns of plot probably wouldn't work. Her chemistry with genre vet Kyle Gallner is fantastic, and she instantly establishes herself here as a deeply compelling new scream queen, with a clear aptitude for portraying femme fatale type characters. Lupita Nyong'o, A Quiet Place, Day One. Though it's no surprise that Lupita Nyong'o gave it her all in A Quiet Place Day One, it was surprising that Michael Sarnowski's film proved to be such an intimate and character-driven piece of work, enough that some were even left underwhelmed by how little it functioned as a true prequel to A Quiet Place. Sarnowski was clearly far more interested in examining protagonist Sam in forensic detail, a terminally ill woman who simply wants to make it through one more day just as the alien creatures invade Earth. Nyong'o gives one of her best performances, and that's really saying something, as an innately sympathetic character with a clear-eyed goal she wants to accomplish before her limited remaining time alive is over. She brings enormous soul and gravitas to Sam's tragic journey, and plays wonderfully off co-star Joseph Quinn as fellow survivor Eric. In a film that many assumed wouldn't offer too much for its actors, Nyong'o gave a genuinely Oscar-worthy portrayal. Naomi Scott, Smile 2. Smile 2 proved that filmmaker Parker Finn is no one-trick pony, offering up an arguably even better sequel that has one major ace up its sleeve, Naomi Scott. Scott portrays troubled protagonist Sky Riley, a pop star who finds herself preyed upon by the focal trauma demon. And to call the film one hell of a calling card for her acting chops is quite the understatement indeed. She doesn't merely do a serviceable job for a mainstream horror movie. She commits fully to the script's intense demands and delivers a performance that, in a just world, would be courting awards buzz right now. But alas, we all know what the Academy thinks about most of the horror genre. All the same, Naomi Scott gives herself over entirely to Finn's script, delivering one of cinema's most evocative recent portrayals of sanity slippage, regardless of genre. One can only imagine how emotionally draining Smile 2 must have been for Scott to shoot, but the result is one of the most memorable performances from any mainstream horror film of the past decade.